The morning mist clung to the gates of Kensington Palace like a shroud, and Thomas Hartwell adjusted his uniform collar as he began another day that would forever change his life. For 15 years he had walked these same corridors, his footsteps echoing against walls that had witnessed centuries of royal drama. But nothing in his extensive training had prepared him for what lay ahead on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday in October. Thomas was not your typical palace guard. At 52, his weathered face told stories of a life lived in service to the crown. His father had served before him, and his grandfather before that. The Hartwell family had been protectors of royal secrets for 3 generations, their loyalty as unwavering as the ancient stones of the palace itself. Thomas took pride in this heritage, carrying himself with the quiet dignity of a man who understood that discretion was not just part of his job, it was his calling. The events that would soon unfold had their roots in a conversation that occurred 6 months earlier, in the private study of Princess Diana's former quarters. The room had remained largely untouched since her tragic death in 1997, preserved as both memorial and storage space for her personal effects. It was here that Thomas had made a discovery that would haunt him for months to come. While conducting a routine security inspection, Thomas had noticed something peculiar about the ornate bookshelf that dominated the room's eastern wall. One of the volumes, a leather-bound collection of Shakespeare's sonnets, seemed slightly out of place. Years of attention to detail had trained his eye to notice such discrepancies. When he gently adjusted the book, he was startled to hear a soft clicking sound, followed by the slow movement of the bookshelf itself. Behind the bookshelf lay a small hidden chamber that Thomas estimated to be no larger than a walk-in closet. The space was climate-controlled and contained several file cabinets, each meticulously labeled in Princess Diana's own handwriting. The labels bore dates ranging from 1981 to 1997, spanning the entirety of her marriage to Prince Charles and beyond. Thomas's hands trembled as he realized the magnitude of what he had uncovered. The discovery presented Thomas with an immediate dilemma. Protocol dictated that any significant findings in royal residences should be reported to his superiors immediately. However, something about the careful way Diana had concealed this archive gave him pause. The princess had been known for her intelligence and her understanding of palace politics. If she had gone to such lengths to hide these documents, perhaps she had good reason. Thomas made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He carefully documented the location and contents of the archive without removing anything, then sealed the room and said nothing to his supervisors. For 6 months, the secret weighed heavily on his conscience, but his instinct told him to wait. Diana had trusted someone to protect these secrets after her death, and fate had chosen him as that guardian. The morning that would test his resolve began like any other. Thomas arrived at the palace at dawn, conducted his usual security briefing, and began his rounds. The autumn air was crisp, and the palace grounds were painted in shades of gold and amber as the season prepared for winter's arrival. He had no way of knowing that Camilla Parker Bowles, now the Duchess of Cornwall, had spent the previous evening in heated discussion with palace officials about gaining access to Diana's former quarters. The request had come through official channels, presented as a desire to create a proper memorial space for the late princess. Camilla's representatives argued that it was time to properly catalog and preserve Diana's belongings for historical purposes. The request seemed reasonable on its surface, but Thomas knew the palace well enough to recognize political maneuvering when he saw it. As Thomas made his morning rounds, he encountered Margaret Thornbury, the palace's head of household staff. Margaret was a woman in her 60s who had served the royal family for over 4 decades. Her loyalty to Diana had been absolute, and she had never quite warmed to Camilla's presence in the palace. The two had developed a quiet understanding over the years, bonded by their shared respect for the late princess. "Thomas," Margaret called softly as he passed her in the corridor leading to Diana's quarters.
"A word, if you please."
They stepped into an alcove, away from the foot traffic of staff members beginning their daily duties. Margaret's expression was troubled, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of concern.
"I've received instructions from the Duchess," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "She wishes to access Princess Diana's study this afternoon. She's bringing specialists to evaluate the contents for a memorial project." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. He had always known this day would come, but he had hoped for more time to decide how to handle the situation. "What kind of specialists?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Archivists, historians, and someone from the royal collection," Margaret replied. "They have full authorization from the Prince of Wales himself. I'm to provide complete access to all areas of the quarters." The weight of his secret pressed down on Thomas like a physical force. He knew that professional archivists would almost certainly discover the hidden chamber. Their training would lead them to examine every inch of the space, and Diana's clever concealment would not withstand such scrutiny. Once discovered, the contents of those files would become subject to royal discretion, potentially disappearing forever into the vast machinery of palace bureaucracy. "What time?" Thomas asked, his mind already working through possible scenarios. 2 o'clock this afternoon, Margaret answered. "Thomas, is there something I should know? You look as though you've seen a ghost." Thomas studied Margaret's face, weighing his options carefully. Her loyalty to Diana was beyond question, but involving her in his secret would make her complicit, whatever consequences might follow. He made another decision that would prove crucial to the events that followed. "Margaret," he said slowly, "what if I told you that Princess Diana left something behind that she clearly didn't want anyone to find?" Margaret's eyes widened slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I would say that the princess was a very intelligent woman who understood this place better than most. I would also say that perhaps her wishes should be respected." Thomas nodded, grateful for her implicit understanding. "Then I believe we need to discuss what loyalty truly means in a place like this." The two spent the next hour in careful conversation, speaking in the coded language that palace staff had perfected over decades of service. They discussed duty and discretion, loyalty and legacy. By the end of their talk, Margaret understood that Thomas had discovered something significant, and Thomas understood that he would not face the afternoon's challenge alone. As the morning progressed, Thomas went about his duties with mechanical precision while his mind raced through possibilities. He could simply stand aside and allow the archivists to discover the hidden chamber. He could report the discovery himself before the afternoon visit, claiming he had only just found it. Or he could do something unprecedented in his 15 years of service. He could refuse access altogether. The third option seemed impossible at first consideration. Palace guards did not refuse access to senior members of the royal family. Such defiance would result in immediate dismissal and possibly criminal charges, depending on how the situation was handled. Yet as Thomas considered the alternative, watching Diana's carefully protected secrets fall into the hands of those she had clearly sought to keep them from, the impossible began to seem like the only honorable choice. At 11 o'clock, Thomas received confirmation that the afternoon visit would proceed as planned. The Duchess would arrive with her team of specialists, and they would have unlimited access to Diana's quarters for as long as necessary to complete their evaluation. The authorization bore the official seal of the Prince of Wales, making it a direct royal command. Thomas stared at the document for a long time, understanding that his next decision would define not just his future, but his understanding of himself. He thought of his father, who had served the palace with unwavering obedience for 30 years. He thought of his grandfather, who had spoken often of duty and honor. But most of all, he thought of Princess Diana and the trust she had unknowingly placed in him by creating her secret archive. The lunch hour came and went without Thomas eating. He stood in Diana's former study, looking at the bookshelf that concealed so many secrets. The room felt heavy with history and expectation. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the Persian carpet that Diana had chosen years earlier. At exactly 2 o'clock, Thomas heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Multiple voices approached, and he recognized Camilla's distinctive tone among them. The moment of truth had arrived, and Thomas Hartwell, third-generation palace guard, stood ready to make a choice that would shock the royal household to its very core. The door opened, and Camilla entered with her entourage of specialists. She wore a deep blue suit and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to having doors opened and paths cleared. Behind her came 3 archivists, 2 historians, and a representative from the Royal Collection Trust. Their equipment cases and cameras marked them as professionals prepared for a thorough examination. "Good afternoon, Thomas," Camilla said with a polite smile. "I trust everything is prepared for our visit?" Thomas stood at attention, his uniform pristine, his expression carefully neutral. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. He looked into the eyes of the woman who had become his princess's greatest rival. When he spoke, his voice was clear and steady, carrying the weight of 15 years of loyal service and 3 generations of family honor. "I'm sorry, Your Royal Highness," Thomas said, "but I cannot allow access to this room today." The silence that followed was deafening. The specialists behind Camilla shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether they had misheard. Camilla herself appeared momentarily stunned, as if she couldn't quite process what had just occurred. "I beg your pardon," she said, her voice carrying the first hint of steel. "This room contains materials that require special protection," Thomas continued, his training keeping his voice level despite the thundering of his heart. "I have reason to believe that Princess Diana intended certain items to remain secure, and I must honor that intention." What followed would become palace legend, whispered in corridors and staff quarters for years to come. The afternoon that was supposed to be a simple archival survey had become a confrontation that would expose secrets, test loyalties, and ultimately reveal the true cost of protecting the memory of the people's princess. The standoff in Princess Diana's former study had transformed the ornate room into a battlefield where protocol clashed with principle, and the very foundations of royal authority trembled under the weight of one man's defiance. Thomas Hartwell stood his ground, his weathered hands clasped behind his back in the classic pose of a palace guard, while Camilla's shocked expression slowly gave way to something far more dangerous. "Thomas," she said, her voice now carrying the unmistakable edge of someone unaccustomed to being denied, "I believe there has been some misunderstanding. I have full authorization from the Prince of Wales himself." She gestured to Dr. This is Helena Whitmore, the lead archivist, who stepped forward with obvious discomfort. Dr. Chesapeake. Whitmore was a woman in her 50s, respected in her field and completely unprepared for palace drama. She fumbled with her briefcase and produced the official documents that Camilla's office had provided. "Perhaps you haven't seen the proper paperwork," Dr. Whitmore suggested diplomatically, extending the documents toward Thomas. "These bear the prince's seal and clearly authorize our presence here." Thomas accepted the papers and examined them carefully, taking his time despite the growing tension in the room. He recognized the official letterhead, the formal language, and the unmistakable seal of the Prince of Wales. Under normal circumstances, such authorization would be absolute and unquestionable, but these were far from normal circumstances. "I have reviewed the documentation, Dr. Whitmore," Thomas replied, handing the papers back. "However, I have information that supersedes these instructions. Princess Diana left specific provisions regarding the security of certain materials in this room. The lie came easily, born from desperation, and wrapped in just enough truth to sound convincing." Thomas had no such provisions from Diana, but he understood that the princess had concealed her archive for a reason that went beyond simple privacy. His years of palace service had taught him to read between the lines of royal behavior, and Diana's actions spoke louder than any written instruction. Camilla's composure began to crack visibly. Her face flushed slightly and her hands tightened around her handbag. "Thomas, I'm going to ask you one more time to step aside. You are a security guard, not a legal authority. You have no right to prevent authorized personnel from performing their duties. With respect, Your Royal Highness." Thomas responded, his voice growing stronger with each word. "My primary duty is to protect the assets and interests of the royal family. That includes protecting the legacy and wishes of its deceased members." The statement hung in the air like a challenge, and everyone in the room understood its implications. Thomas was suggesting that Diana's interests might not align with those of the current royal hierarchy, a dangerous assertion that bordered on treasonous thinking within palace walls. Doctors never felt in a contest in past task. Jonathan Ashford, one of the historians accompanying the group, cleared his throat nervously. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who had spent most of his career studying royal history from the safety of academic distance. Finding himself in the middle of an active royal confrontation was clearly beyond his comfort zone. "Perhaps," he ventured hesitantly, "we could contact the palace administration to clarify the situation. There may be protocols for handling such unique circumstances." Camilla turned on him with barely controlled fury. "Dr. Ashford, the protocols are quite clear. We have authorization, and this guard is acting beyond his authority. There is nothing to clarify." But Thomas had noticed something in Dr. Ashford's suggestion that gave him hope. The historian had used the word unique, suggesting that even the experts recognized something unusual about the situation. More importantly, involving palace administration would buy Thomas time to figure out his next move. "Dr. Ashford raises an excellent point," Thomas said. "This situation is unprecedented in my experience. Perhaps it would be wise to consult with Sir Marcus Pemberton before proceeding." Sir Marcus Pemberton was the palace's chief administrator, a career civil servant who had navigated royal politics for over 20 years. He was known for his caution, his attention to detail, and his absolute dedication to avoiding scandal. If anyone could help Thomas navigate this dangerous territory, it would be Sir Marcus. Camilla's eyes flashed dangerously. "I will not be delayed by bureaucratic nonsense. This guard is acting on his own authority, probably hoping for some sort of reward or recognition for his dramatics." The accusations stung, but Thomas forced himself to remain calm. "Your Royal Highness, my only concern is fulfilling my duty to protect royal interests. If my interpretation is incorrect, I'm certain Sir Marcus will clarify the matter quickly." What followed was a tense 15 minutes while attempts were made to reach Sir Marcus. The specialists stood awkwardly in the corridor outside Diana's study, their expensive equipment abandoned, as they found themselves unwitting participants in a royal drama. Thomas remained at his post, blocking access to the room, while his mind raced through possible scenarios for what would happen next. Margaret Thornberry appeared with tea service, a gesture that seemed routine but carried deeper significance. Her presence reminded everyone that the palace staff were watching the situation unfold, and that news of the confrontation would spread quickly through the complex network of servants and administrators who truly ran the royal household. "Sir Marcus is in meetings with the Prince of Wales," Margaret announced quietly. "He expects to be available within the hour." The news that Sir Marcus was meeting with Prince Charles sent a ripple of tension through the group. If the prince became directly involved in the situation, the consequences for Thomas would be severe and immediate. But it also meant that the matter would receive the highest level of attention, which might work in his favor if he could present his case properly. Camilla made a decision that revealed the depth of her frustration.
"Very well," she said coldly. "We'll wait for Sir Marcus."
"But Thomas, I want you to understand that your career with the royal household is in serious jeopardy. Guards who cannot follow simple instructions have no place in palace service." The threat was clear and probably accurate, but Thomas found himself strangely at peace with the prospect. His father had always told him that a man's character was measured not by his successes, but by what he was willing to sacrifice for his principles. Today, Thomas was discovering the truth of that lesson. As they waited, Thomas found his mind drifting to memories of Princess Diana during her years at Kensington Palace. He remembered her kindness to the staff, her genuine interest in their lives and families. She had possessed an unusual quality among the royals. She treated the palace servants as real people rather than invisible functionaries. Thomas recalled one particular evening when Diana had stopped to ask about his daughter's recovery from surgery, remembering details about the child's condition that she had no official reason to know. It was during these reflections that Thomas realized something crucial about his situation. His defiance wasn't just about protecting Diana's secrets. It was about honoring the woman she had been. Diana had fought throughout her marriage to maintain her integrity in the face of institutional pressure. She had refused to quietly disappear into the background of royal life, insisting on carving out her own space and identity. Thomas's refusal to step aside was, in its own way, a continuation of her resistance. The hour passed slowly, marked by uncomfortable small talk among the specialists and increasingly pointed comments from Camilla. When Sir Marcus finally arrived, his expression suggested that he already understood the delicate nature of the situation. He was a tall, distinguished man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the composed demeanor of someone accustomed to handling royal crises. "Your Royal Highness," he said, bowing slightly to Camilla, before turning to address the entire group. "I understand there has been some confusion about access to Princess Diana's former quarters." "There has been no confusion," Camilla replied sharply. "This guard has refused to honor a direct royal authorization. The situation requires immediate correction." "Thomas, I've worked with you for many years, and I've always found you to be reliable and level-headed. Help me understand your position." Thomas felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. This was his opportunity to explain himself. But he had to be careful not to reveal the existence of the hidden archive without proper preparation. The wrong words could expose Diana's secrets while failing to protect them. "Sir Marcus," Thomas began carefully, "during my routine security duties, I've become aware that Princess Diana took specific measures to secure certain materials in her quarters. While I don't have written instructions, her actions suggest she intended these materials to remain protected. I believe we have a duty to honor those intentions before allowing unrestricted access." "And what sort of materials are you referring to?" Thomas had prepared for this question, knowing that he would need to provide some details without revealing everything. Personal documents, correspondence, and other items that appear to have been deliberately concealed. The princess was known to be concerned about privacy and the potential misuse of her personal papers. The statement was technically true, even if it didn't capture the full significance of what Thomas had discovered. Sir Marcus studied his face for a long moment, and Thomas sensed that the administrator was evaluating not just his words but his motivations. "Thomas," Sir Marcus said finally, "you understand that refusing access to members of the royal family is a serious matter? Even if your concerns are well-intentioned, there are proper channels for raising such issues." "Yes, sir," Thomas replied, "but I also understand that some situations require immediate action to prevent irreversible consequences. Once these materials are exposed to examination, we cannot undo that exposure." Camilla had been growing visibly impatient during the exchange. "Sir Marcus,
Surely you're not going to allow a guard to dictate palace policy. This man is clearly overstepping his authority, and his concerns about Princess Diana's wishes are nothing more than speculation. Sir Marcus raised a hand to forestall further comments.
Your Royal Highness, Thomas raises legitimate concerns about proper procedures. Perhaps it would be prudent to conduct a preliminary assessment before proceeding with the full archival survey. The suggestion was diplomatic, but Thomas recognized it as a potential trap. A preliminary assessment would likely discover the hidden chamber, placing the archive's contents at risk. He needed to find a way to control the process without appearing to dictate terms to royal authority.
Sir Marcus, Thomas said, might I suggest that any preliminary assessment include representation for Princess Diana's interests? Perhaps someone from the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Trust could participate in the evaluation. The suggestion was inspired, and Thomas could see its impact on everyone present. The Memorial Trust had been established to continue Diana's charitable work, and involving them would demonstrate respect for her legacy while providing an additional layer of oversight.
More importantly, it would delay the process long enough for Thomas to figure out how to properly protect the archive. Camilla's reaction was immediate and negative.
That's completely unnecessary. This is a simple archival matter, not a memorial service.
We don't need outside interference. But Sir Marcus looked intrigued by the possibility. Actually involving the Memorial Trust might be appropriate. They have legitimate interests in preserving Princess Diana's legacy, and their participation would demonstrate our commitment to transparency.
Thomas felt a surge of hope, but he knew the battle was far from over. The afternoon's confrontation had established his position and bought him valuable time, but the ultimate resolution would require careful planning and perhaps a few miracles. As the group prepared to adjourn pending further consultation, Thomas caught a glimpse of something that chilled him to the bone. Camilla was studying the room with the practiced eye of someone looking for secrets. Her gaze lingered on the bookshelf that concealed Diana's archive, and Thomas realized that his refusal to allow access had only increased her suspicion that something valuable was hidden in the room. The very act of protecting Diana's secrets might have drawn unwanted attention to their hiding place. As the group filed out of the room, Sir Marcus paused beside Thomas. "You've started something here that cannot be easily stopped," he said quietly. "I hope you understand what you're risking." "I understand completely, sir," Thomas replied. "The question is whether the risks of action outweigh the risks of inaction." Sir Marcus nodded slowly. "Indeed, that is always the question in places like this." Alone again in Diana's study, Thomas stared at the bookshelf that held so many secrets. The afternoon's confrontation had been just the beginning of what promised to be a much larger battle. Forces were now in motion that would determine not just the fate of Diana's hidden archive, but the very meaning of loyalty, duty, and honor in the modern royal household. The evening shadows were growing longer, and Thomas knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and perhaps even greater risks. But for now, Diana's secrets remained safe, protected by a simple palace guard who had chosen principle over protocol and integrity over institutional convenience. The cost of that choice remained to be calculated, but Thomas Hartwell had no regrets about the path he had chosen to walk. The 48 hours following Thomas Hartwell's unprecedented defiance transformed Kensington Palace from a place of routine royal business into a cauldron of whispered conversations, political maneuvering, and barely contained tension. Word of the confrontation had spread through the palace staff with the speed that only truly shocking news could achieve, and by the following morning, everyone from the head butler to the newest kitchen maid knew that a simple guard had refused access to the Duchess of Cornwall herself. Thomas arrived for his shift to find the atmosphere dramatically changed. Colleagues who had greeted him warmly for 15 years now offered hesitant nods or avoided eye contact altogether. He understood their discomfort. His actions had placed everyone in an awkward position. Palace staff lived by an unspoken code of loyalty and discretion, and Thomas's public defiance of royal authority had shattered that code in ways that made everyone nervous about their own security. Sir Marcus Pemberton had worked through the night, consulting with legal advisors, royal historians, and senior palace officials. The situation Thomas had created was unprecedented in modern royal service, and the implications extended far beyond a simple dispute over archival access. If a guard could refuse royal commands based on his personal interpretation of deceased royals' wishes, the entire structure of palace authority could be called into question. The solution Sir Marcus proposed was characteristically cautious but politically astute. Rather than immediately disciplining Thomas or forcing the issue with Camilla, he recommended forming a special committee to examine the situation and establish proper procedures for handling similar cases in the future.
The committee would include representatives from the Royal Collection Trust, the Diana Memorial Trust, and senior palace administration, ensuring that all perspectives were considered before any final decisions were made. Prince Charles, when briefed on the situation, had surprised many by supporting Sir Marcus's measured approach. Despite his complicated relationship with his late ex-wife, Charles understood better than most the political sensitivities surrounding Diana's legacy. A ham-fisted response to Thomas's actions could easily generate negative publicity and reopen old wounds about the royal family's treatment of the people's princess.
"Let them form their committee," Charles had reportedly told Sir Marcus. "But make it clear that we will not allow palace staff to dictate royal policy. There must be consequences for defying legitimate authority, regardless of the motivations." Camilla's reaction to the committee proposal was less diplomatic. She viewed Thomas's actions as a personal affront and interpreted the palace's measured response as weakness that would only encourage future defiance. Her friends reported that she was particularly incensed by what she saw as continued interference from Diana's ghost in royal affairs. Meanwhile, Thomas faced the most difficult period of his professional life. He was temporarily reassigned to administrative duties while the committee conducted its investigation, effectively removing him from his position guarding Diana's quarters. The reassignment was presented as a neutral action pending resolution of the situation, but Thomas understood it as the first step in what would likely be his dismissal from palace service. The temporary guard assigned to Diana's study was William Morrison, a younger man whose loyalty to established authority was unquestioned. William had been instructed to maintain normal security protocols while allowing the committee supervised access to the room for their investigation. Thomas watched from his new desk assignment as experts began their careful examination of Diana's former quarters, knowing that the discovery of the hidden archive was now inevitable. Dr. Helena Whitmore led the archival team with professional thoroughness that Thomas both admired and dreaded. She approached the study with the systematic methodology that had made her reputation, cataloging every book, document, and personal effect with meticulous care. Thomas estimated that her team would discover the hidden bookshelf mechanism within days, possibly hours. The breakthrough came on Thursday afternoon, exactly where Thomas had expected it. Dr. Whitmore was examining the bookshelf when she noticed the same irregularities that had caught Thomas's attention months earlier. The Shakespeare volume was positioned slightly differently from its neighbors, and when she adjusted it to achieve proper alignment, the familiar clicking sound echoed through the room. Thomas was summoned immediately to witness the discovery. Sir Marcus had insisted that he be present when the hidden chamber was opened, both to verify his earlier claims about Princess Diana's concealment activities and to ensure transparency in the investigation process. As Thomas entered the study, he found Dr. Whitmore standing beside the partially opened bookshelf with an expression of profound amazement. "Thomas," Sir Marcus said formally, "Dr. Whitmore has discovered what appears to be a concealed storage area behind this bookshelf. Can you confirm whether this is related to your earlier concerns about Princess Diana's secured materials?" The moment of truth had arrived sooner than Thomas had hoped, but he was prepared for it. "Yes, sir," he replied steadily. "This is the concealment I referenced during our previous discussion." Dr. Whitmore stepped aside to allow Sir Marcus and the committee members to examine the hidden chamber. The space was small but sophisticated, clearly designed to protect important documents from both discovery and environmental damage. The file cabinets stood in perfect order, their labels clearly visible in Diana's distinctive handwriting. "Remarkable," whispered Dr. Sire James Crawford, the representative from the Diana Memorial Trust. "The princess clearly devoted considerable thought and resources to creating this archive." The committee spent the remainder of the afternoon discussing how to proceed. The discovery had validated Thomas's claims about Diana's intentions to protect certain materials, but it had also raised new questions about the contents of the files and their potential significance. Dr. Whitmore estimated that the archive contained several hundred documents spanning Diana's entire adult life. The committee's initial examination revealed that the archive was organized chronologically and thematically. There were sections devoted to Diana's marriage, her charitable work, her relationships with her sons, and her various conflicts with royal protocol. Some files contained correspondence with prominent political figures, while others held personal journals and private photographs that had never been released to the public. Most intriguingly, the final section of the archive was labeled Insurance and appeared to contain materials that Diana had specifically gathered as protection against potential threats to her reputation or safety. This section included recorded conversations, copies of sensitive documents, and detailed accounts of various incidents that had occurred during her years as a royal family member. Sir Marcus understood immediately that the discovery had transformed a simple archival dispute into a potential constitutional crisis.
The contents of Diana's hidden archive could contain information that would embarrass the royal family, damage international relationships, or expose sensitive security matters. At the same time, the materials clearly represented Diana's personal property and her deliberate efforts to preserve her own version of events for posterity.
Dr. Whitmore, Sir Marcus said carefully, I need you to secure this archive immediately. Nothing is to be removed or copied without explicit authorization from the highest levels of palace administration. The contents of these files require evaluation by security experts before any further access is permitted.
The decision to restrict access to the archive pending security review was probably inevitable, but it represented a defeat for Thomas's hopes of ensuring that Diana's materials would be treated according to her wishes rather than royal convenience. He had succeeded in protecting the archive from immediate exploitation, but he had also ensured that its contents would now be subject to the same institutional control that Diana had sought to avoid.
As the committee members filed out of the study, Dr. Crawford approached Thomas with an expression of sympathy and respect. You've performed an extraordinary service, he told Thomas quietly. Princess Diana would be grateful that someone was willing to stand up for her intentions regardless of the personal cost. The personal cost was indeed becoming clear. Thomas received formal notification that evening that his employment with the royal household would be terminated at the end of the month. The dismissal letter cited inability to follow established protocols and conduct incompatible with royal service expectations. There was no mention of his 15 years of faithful service or his family's 3 generations of loyal dedication to the crown.
The news of Thomas's dismissal leaked to the press within hours, creating the first public awareness of the confrontation between the Guard and the Duchess of Cornwall.
Initial reports were sketchy and often inaccurate, but they captured the essential drama of a common man standing up to royal authority in defense of Princess Diana's memory.
Public reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly supportive of Thomas's position.
Diana remained enormously popular with the British people, and the idea that someone was protecting her secrets from those who had opposed her during her lifetime struck a powerful emotional chord. Letters of support poured into the palace, along with donations to a legal defense fund that someone had established on Thomas's behalf. The media attention forced the royal family into an uncomfortable position. They could not publicly defend Camilla's attempt to access Diana's quarters without appearing callous toward the late princess's memory.
At the same time, they could not appear to endorse defiance of royal authority without undermining their own institutional power. Prince William and Prince Harry, when informed of the situation, reportedly expressed quiet support for Thomas's actions. Both princes had grown up understanding that their mother had possessed secrets that she had kept from the royal establishment, and they appreciated Thomas's efforts to protect their mother's legacy. However, their public position was necessarily limited by their own roles within the royal hierarchy.
The resolution came through negotiations that Thomas was not privy to but could observe from the sidelines. A compromise was reached whereby Diana's archive would be placed under the joint custody of the Royal Collection Trust and the Diana Memorial Trust, ensuring that any future access would require approval from both institutions. The materials would be preserved for historical purposes, but sensitive contents would remain restricted for an appropriate period. Thomas's dismissal was quietly converted to early retirement with full pension benefits, a face-saving gesture that acknowledged his service while maintaining the principle that defiance of royal authority carried consequences.
The official statement praised his dedication to protecting royal interests, while emphasizing that proper channels existed for raising concerns about protocol violations. On his final day at Kensington Palace, Thomas made one last visit to Diana's study.
The hidden bookshelf had been sealed again, and the room had returned to its previous appearance as a memorial space. But Thomas knew that behind the Shakespeare sonnets, Diana's truth remained protected by institutional oversight rather than personal loyalty.
Margaret Thornbury found him there as he prepared to leave the palace for the final time.
You did the right thing, she told him simply.
Princess Diana always said that loyalty meant protecting people even when they couldn't protect themselves. As Thomas walked through the palace gates for the last time, he reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. He had begun the week as an anonymous guard performing routine duties, and he was ending it as a symbol of resistance to royal authority and a guardian of one of the monarchy's most sensitive secrets.
The hidden archive remained secure, its contents protected by the compromise that Thomas's defiance had forced upon the royal establishment. Diana's voice, preserved in her own words and documents, would survive to tell her story to future generations.
The price had been Thomas's career and his family's generational connection to royal service, but he found himself surprisingly at peace with that exchange. In the months that followed, Thomas would become something of a folk hero to Diana's admirers around the world. His story would be told and retold as an example of ordinary courage in the face of institutional power. and his name would be forever linked with the princess whose memory he had protected.
The confrontation between a simple guard and the Duchess of Cornwall had revealed fundamental tensions within the modern monarchy, about authority, loyalty, and the competing claims of the living and the dead. Thomas Hartwell's refusal to step aside had forced a reckoning with those tensions that would influence royal protocol for years to come.
But in the end, the story was simpler than its political implications suggested. It was about a man who had made a promise to protect something precious, and who had kept that promise regardless of the cost.
In a world where such integrity was increasingly rare, Thomas's stand had reminded everyone that sometimes the most important battles were fought not in boardrooms or parliaments, but in quiet moments when individuals chose principle over convenience. Diana's secrets remained safe, protected now by institutional safeguards rather than personal courage.
But the legacy of Thomas Hartwell's defiance would endure, as a reminder that even in the most rigid hierarchies, individual conscience could still make a difference when it mattered most.